So let's now create our first task, which will compile Sass to CSS and minify the CSS. So I'm gonna now rename the hello dummy task to styles, and so we can write our logic here. Let's now create a new Sass file, and this will be the file that we want to compile. So let's call it bundle.scss. So it will be just one single file that we will compile, and if you want to organize your files into multiple Sass files, we can just import them into the bundle.scss. So for example, we can have a folder called components, and again I created a file. And let's say inside it you have some sort of a component. Maybe you want to add the header styles in a separate file. So we have our Sass file for the header. And we can just include it in the bundle file in order just to have one file to compile. So in the same directory, search for components and then header. So now we need to compile this bundle.scss file into bundle.css file. So let's write our task now. So Gulp itself, it helps us create tasks, but it doesn't actually do the jobs we need. It doesn't actually compile the Sass and that sort of stuff. We need to install additional packages in order to do that. So let's search for Gulp Sass. And install it. And it might take a while, and after it's done, we can see how to use it here. So let's go back now to our Gulp file and try to use this Sass library. So I'm gonna import it. Import Sass from Gulp Sass. So remember when we created a dummy task to use this done signal in order to tell Gulp when the task is done. In our case, we won't have to use that because we will return a node stream, and the node stream is just a representation for a file. So if we type gulp.src and then a path for a file. So in our case, it's src and then assets, and scss, and then bundle. So this function will return a kind of a representation for the file in this path, and it's called a stream. And if you know about Node.js, you might heard about this before, but the details are not important. It's just enough to know that this is a representation for the file. And now we want to do some sort of a transformation to this file, right? We want to take what's in this file and compile it. And to do that, we use another function called pipe. So .pipe. And inside the pipe function, we will run the Sass package. So Sass. And it takes an error called back. So if you have a syntax error in your Sass files, you can log it in the console. Sass.log error. And pipe also returns the same representation for the file, but after you've done the transformation, you've done the Sass plugin. So now we need to save it somewhere. So to do that, we use pipe also. And then we use something called gulp.dest for destination. And then we type the destination path we want to save the file in. So it's a convention to save the compiled files in a folder called dist for distribution, and then we'll follow the same path as we created in the source folder. So dist assets SCSS, or CSS this time. So let's try and run this task now and see what would happen. So I'm gonna run gulp styles, and we have an error here. Okay, so let's comment this out for now. So as you can see, starting styles, finish styles. So let's go now to the folder and see if it created the compiled file. And as you can see, you have the dist folder now, and assets, CSS, and the compiled CSS file. So let's type actually some CSS in order to make sure this is working properly. So inside the header file, which we include in the bundle, I'm gonna type some CSS. And then run the gulp task again. And now we have the in the bundle.css the compiled version. So let's do the minification now. And for that I'm gonna use another package called gulp clean CSS. So let's install it. And then use it. So in the gulp file, let's import clean CSS from gulp clean CSS. And then after the SAS compiling, we'll do another transformation. We'll pipe and then clean CSS, and it takes some argument. It can take a compatibility, and it takes a minimum browser to support. So I'm gonna type IE8. So let's save and run the task again. Gulp styles, and let's see what happened to the bundle.css, and it's minified, as you can see. So as we mentioned, we won't have to do the minification during development. So we did this production flag, and now we need to use it. We need to add some if condition here. If we are in production, minify the CSS. Otherwise, just skip this part. And to do that, we will have to add another package called ng gulpif. So gulpif will simply allow us to do something in the pipe function depending on a certain condition. So let's install it. It's called gulpif. So npm install gulpif dash save dash dev. And then we'll import it. And to use inside the pipe function, we just have to, instead of just running clean CSS directly, we'll run gulpif and then add the condition, which is production. If production is true, run clean CSS. So the second argument is the function that we want to run if the first argument is true. So let's try this. So let's run gulp styles without the production flag, and as you can see, it's not modified. And if we type dash dash prod, now it's minified. Great, so let's load now the CSS in the theme. So we'll go to the WordPress stuff for a bit. So remember in the header file, when we mentioned that we will use the WP head and the WP footer functions in order to enqueue, or in order to add JavaScript files and CSS files. And that's exactly what we're gonna do now. So in the functions of PHP, so let's keep it organized. Let's add another file to add our scripts. So I'm gonna call it enqueue assets, and let's copy the name and create this file in the lib folder. I'm gonna open a PHP tag and create a new function. So remember in the helpers file we mentioned that all our functions must be prefixed, right? So I'm gonna do the prefix and then function name, and let's call it simply assets. And then to add a style sheet, we use a function called WP enqueue style. So the first argument is the handle, or this is the unique name for the style sheet, and it should also be prefixed. So let's use the first theme prefix and then style sheet. So this should be unique, and then the source, which is the path for the file, and the path for the file would be the dist assets css bundle.css. So we'll get the theme directory using a function called getTemplate directory URI, and then appended with our path, which is dist assets css bundle.css. And then we can have an array of the dependencies. Can leave it as an empty array for now. And media is a CSS media query. We want to load it for all media queries, so just type all. And then we use a function called add action. And we'll talk more about add action later. But what add action will do is just simply we'll use the WP head and WP footer hooks in order to add something to them. If this sounds vague to you, we'll talk about it later in more details in the course. But just for now, the first argument is the action name, which is WP enqueue scripts, and then the function name, which is this one. And don't worry, as I mentioned, we'll talk about the add action function later. But right now it should work. So let's go back to the browser and make sure you have the MEMP server opened and go to your theme. And looks like it's not loaded, so let's take a look. Oh, it's loaded actually. Okay, I mistyped bundle here. Sorry about that. Okay, so I realized I did another mistake in the Gulp file. I typed asset here instead of assets. So let's correct that and run the Gulp styles task again, and it should work this time. So it looks like I did another mistake in the enqueue scripts function enqueue style. After the array of dependencies, we have the version before the media query. So I'm gonna type with version 1, and I hope it will work this time. So I realized another mistake in the in the SAS file, the body just, it's not a class, it's an element. So to rerun the task, it should work this time, pretty sure. And finally,